Good afternoon, everyone. We will get started in just another minute. All right. I am going to get us started because we had a lot of good information to present, and I want to give plenty of time for questions at the end. So my name is Maggie Schober. I'm the research director here at the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, or SACE, and this is our uh, webinar to present some results from our latest report, Solar in the Southeast. This is the eighth time we've done a solar report. It looks, a little bit different every year, but this is something we've been doing now for quite a while and excited to bring to you all the latest on solar in the Southeast. First, I'm going to kick it over to SACE's Executive Director, Stephen Smith, and then we'll have some presentations from uh, the report authors. And if at any point you have questions, we're going to use the Q&A box in Zoom. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, bottom of the box that you have Zoom in, there is a Q ampersand A box, has a little question mark in it. Click there and please type in your questions. You can do that as we're presenting or towards the end. And using that function instead of the chat just helps us track and get to your questions easier. So we look forward to questions and we'll proceed with the presentation. All right, over to you, Steve.
Great. Thank you, Maggie. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Um, First, let me just say that our thoughts are with the people and families in Jamaica and Cuba with the devastation that they're experiencing with Hurricane Melissa. And we're thinking about folks in the Bahamas, too, also. It's really quite amazing the strength and the veracity of that storm. I'm Stephen Smith, the Executive Director of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, uh, SACE. We are a nonprofit that promotes responsible and equitable energy choices that ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. And we're very focused on trying to reduce the environmental footprint of how we produce and consume energy in our region. And this is the eighth report. We are very bullish on solar power, have been for a long time. And as you'll see in this report, we're beginning to see that some states are really starting to make big bets in solar and break away and make it a workhorse technology that we think is necessary. Next slide. So we are absolutely living in a period of extreme climate disruption. We're seeing increasing impacts across the world, but also in our Southeast region, whether they be heat waves, extreme weather events, hurricanes, extreme oscillations and variations in temperature temperature extremes that can disrupt, like some of these extreme polar vortex type of events that we've seen with winter storms or extreme flooding. This is a very real, a clear and present danger in this time of a lot of uh, craziness politically, a lot of polarization. Obviously, we've experienced in the past year a change in administration. that are trying to erase climate impacts and climate itself and the disruption that's happening to the climate, just sort of erase it out of the books, erase it out of government documents, make it kind of go away, stick your head in the sand, pretend like it's not going to happen. That is an absolutely catastrophic thing to be doing when we as humans need to be full press ahead, full bore ahead, contrary to what Bill Gates says and some of these other things. We have got to be moving very aggressively in solving the climate crisis, and we can't be doubling down as a petrostate, as a country, and think that we're going to be able to one, ride through this without causing devastation across the world and devastation at home, and two, it's bad long-term economics for us to do this. So we're focused like a laser beam on the fact that there are solutions to the climate crisis. There are technologies that can be deployed here, now, today, cost effectively. And that is really what this report is all about. Next slide. So we're also in this, man, it's just bizarre. The speculative play that's going on right now, both in uh, AI markets about what is going to happen. I mean, if you listen to a handful of tech bros in Silicon Valley, they're like, the world's going to change. It's going to be fundamentally different. Artificial intelligence is going to change everything you know, and everything's going to be different. And they're spending billions of dollars investing in this technology. It smells a lot like a bubble. It's beginning to feel a lot like a bubble. And I'm not saying that we're not going to see some demand growth in the electric sector from this, but the speculation is off the chain right now about what's going to happen. And I hope everybody that's in the media will hold me accountable when I say this. We are in an AI bubble. There's a lot of speculative plays that are going on, and it is dangerous, in my opinion, to where it is. We've got to make sure that um, the risks are properly allocated to those that are causing this disruption. The speculation in things like nuclear power right now is also very frothy. So there's a lot that's going on in our space. And we are also now beginning to see a real affordability crisis. People are beginning to really feel the way that prices are starting to creep up, the fact that they're seeing significant increases on their bills. A number of our southeastern states have experienced that. This slide is from Lawrence Berkeley and a Browder report that came out earlier this month. And you can see that this is nationwide, but we are going to see cost associated with energy being a major political discussion that we will have going into the midterm elections. You're already seeing it in places like New Jersey and their governor's race and other places. And so this is going to be more and more of an issue. And what we need to be doing is focusing on technologies that we can deploy quickly, we can deploy cost effectively, we know are reliable and are of low risk. And that is why solar meets that profile in a very clear and profound way. Next slide. So, if you're looking at rising costs for consumers, one of the first places you should go to is energy efficiency, because the greenest electron is the one you never use. The most cost-effective electron is the one that you never use. And so when we start seeing demand growth going up, we should really see the utilities and the regulators leaning into energy efficiency. I'm not sure that we're seeing that yet, but that is a way to help customers manage cost, as well as also good planning and not getting too wrapped up in speculative bubbles and overselling what's going to happen in the future by grifters and people who are speculating the market at the expense of ratepayers. So I think we need to be paying attention to all of this. And as we begin to look at the climate crisis and other things, retiring fossil fuel resources, bringing on renewables and storage. Again, solar as we need to shift the narrative instead of solar being an interesting sidebar to solar being a workhorse technology in the Southeast. One of our states has made that transition. Florida Power and Light is doing that. You'll see that in the slides. We're beginning to see them really make the big investments. But that is what it's going to take to be able to manage costs going forward, is getting technologies that can be brought on quickly, cost effectively, don't have fuel cost risk, And the one thing we know for sure is every day the sun comes up in the east and it sets in the west. We can set our clocks to that. We can count on it. So electrification, the utility sector is critical in solving the climate crisis because we need to basically moving towards electrifying everything and decarbonizing the technologies. And that is all possible if we make the right decisions today and make the investments and stay leaned into the workhorse technologies that are not going to exacerbate the problem. Next slide. So I will now turn it over to Heather and look forward to the report and the Q&A that will follow. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Heather Ponin here. I'm going to be walking you through some of the report findings along with my colleague, Stacy Washington. So as Steve noted, SACE is a regional organization focused on transitioning to clean energy sources, including solar, which is the focus of our recently published report and also the topic of today's webinar. So with the scope of the report, we are primarily looking at solar capacity at the regional, state, and utility level. So in order to do that, we look at a couple of different sources of information. And one of the sources of information that we'd like to break down for you all in this webinar is also utility resource plans or integrated resource plans. This is something we'll talk about in greater detail in a couple of slides for each utility. But in addition to those resource plans, we also compile information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And so doing all this allows us to get relatively comprehensive figures for both utility scale and distributed solar or rooftop solar in the region. And those figures also account for solar that is owned by multiple parties, solar that serves load in multiple states, solar that is produced by customers through net metering under tariffs, virtual capacity, and all that sort of thing. I'm also going to quickly note the geographic coverage of the report. If you take a look at the map to the right. So when we refer to the Southeast or Southeastern utilities, we're talking about a specific grouping of utilities in 8 different states. As you'll see from the map, there is partial coverage of some states, and that's intentional because we are focusing on vertically integrated utilities that do not participate in interstate electricity markets. But the report does cover Alabama, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, that portion of Mississippi that's covered by Mississippi Power, and then Tennessee or the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Tennessee Valley region extends a little bit in Kentucky to the north, but that's not really covered in the report. Okay. So moving along, we're going to start off by looking at how much installed solar capacity the region currently has, as well as how much utilities are planning to deploy in the future. So the top line numbers show that the Southeast reached just under 28 gigawatts of solar in 2024, and that's expected to nearly double to 54 megawatts in 2030. And one takeaway here is that if you look at the entire time scale of this graph going back to 2015, it really becomes striking how adept utilities have become at getting solar projects up and running quickly. So collectively, these utilities have made larger and larger capacity deployments in shorter timeframes than ever. And one illustration of this is that if you look at that 28 gigawatts of solar in 2024, that's actually about 5 gigawatts higher than the previous year. And so that increment of 5 gigawatts, that incremental 5 gigawatts of solar, that's actually equivalent to the cumulative amount of solar that the region had in 2017. Okay. Something I'm also going to take an opportunity to note here, which I maybe should have done earlier, is the different color types on this chart. So we're actually looking at different kind of like types of solar. The blue segments of the chart represent utility scale solar deployments. So those are the kind of like larger projects that are either owned by utilities or utilities enter into a purchase power agreement to get the solar from a solar project. And then the yellow is distributed solar, which is predominantly rooftop solar. And so you can also see that the majority of the solar in the region is from utility scale solar. Okay. So I think that is it for this slide. We're here, we're going to look again at solar capacity, but this time by the different states in the Southeast. So we're going to drill down a little bit further and further from region to states to utilities, and then we're going to do utility profiles of some of the major utility systems. But here, so we're looking at the states. I'm going to start with going from highest to lowest, starting with Florida. It's very obvious here that Florida utilities have a strong lead on total installed solar capacity. That cumulative capacity is expected to double from 15 gigawatts of solar in 2024 to 30 gigawatts in 2030. And another interesting thing to note here is actually for Florida, this is really one of the only states in the region where we have a significant amount of capacity that's coming from distributed solar relative to the total solar capacity. Um, okay. And we're going to move along here to North Carolina and Georgia. So these two states are effectively tied in the amount of solar in 2024, at least. Georgia just slightly edged it out a little bit in this latest year. Although the forecast does indicate that North Carolina is expected to pass Georgia in the near future. I also, again, have these labels for Mississippi and North Carolina that we exclude that little bit of Dominion in North Carolina that is served by PJM and as well as the MISO territory in Mississippi. So I'm going to keep going over here to the right, and we're next going to focus on this kind of grouping of states to the right, Alabama, Tennessee, and Mississippi. There's actually several utility scale projects that are coming online from TVA in the next couple of years. However, the historical lack of ambition from the utilities that operate in these states, we're going to talk about TVA a little bit later in the webinar. That historical lack of ambition really makes it difficult to keep pace with the rest of the region. Okay. And so we are once again going to drill down a little bit further. So now we're just looking at a snapshot of which utilities contributed the most solar capacity to the overall region in 2024. So this is breaking down the different utility systems. I'm going to start by focusing on a comparison between FPL, Florida Power and Light, and TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. So both of these utilities are some of the largest in the region, some of the largest in the country. They're about the same size. They both serve about 5 million customers. They both sell about 150,000 gigawatt hours of retail sales to customers in 2024. So they are about the same size. However, you can see that Florida Power and Light has about 5 times, or I think it's a little bit more than that, the solar capacity of TVA. So FPL really is outpacing similar sized utilities. And TVA, you can see even compared to much smaller utilities, I'll point to both Dominion and Oglethorpe. Those are much, much smaller utilities than TVA, but they end up having a comparable amount of solar. Um, I also note that the majority, about three-quarters of all solar capacity in the region is made up, it comes from or is attributed to about three utility systems. So we have Duke Energy, we're going to talk about a little bit later, but that's composed of three different operating utilities in the Southeast. The same goes for Southern Company, but Duke, Southern Company, and Florida Power and Light do end up making the vast majority of solar capacity in the region. Okay, so I'm going to next take a look here at kind of the pace of solar deployments for each utility system. So this is kind of getting at the question of like how quickly are these utilities able to add solar to the grid? So to do that, we looked at a 3-year average of the past 3 years, and we'll see that Florida Power and Light is once again it's leading the region in a couple of different, ways to look at solar. But we see that Florida Power and Light over the past years it had an average of 1,585 megawatts of solar added each year for the past 3 years. And so again, going back to that comparison of FPL and TVA, I do want to give a little bit of credit here to TVA, and I'll do this again a little bit later in the presentation, but you'll see that over the past 3 years, they've added about 255 megawatts per year for that 3-year period, an average over that 3-year period. And they are expected to increase over the next 3 years, so rising up to 735 megawatts per year. So I do want to give them a little bit of credit for, the recent progress, long overdue progress, some might say. It is a little bit unclear in the later years, for instance, during that 2028 to 2030 timeframe. It is a little bit unclear if those projects are going to end up coming to fruition, just because of the way solar projects end up being put into, and again, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but this is solar projects that end up being put into resource plans. Procurement and deployment end up sometimes being on a little bit different time frames. But we do see over the next couple of years that some of the projects that TVA and even these other utilities are working on are, that they're tangible and real and they're getting completed. So we do want to give a little bit of credit to them. And I'm also going to highlight kind of some other utility systems to watch. Southern Company, Duke, and the Florida municipal utilities. So that grouping of the Florida municipal utilities, it is a little bit unusual to see some of the, municipal or smaller utilities in leadership categories like this. But um, it's about like, I think it's 16 or more different public power systems in the state of Florida are engaging in the utility scale projects with municipal backed solar projects. And so the progress that they've made over the 3 years is expected to continue into the future. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about Santee Cooper. This is actually one of the utilities that is slowing the pace of solar. And this is both compared to the pace over the last 3 years and the amount of solar that was filed in their previous plans. Okay. So I think that's about it for this slide. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Stacey Washington, who's going to go into a little bit more detail about some of the utility systems that I talked about earlier. Stacey?
Thank you, Heather. Yes, my name is Stacey Washington, and I'm the Clean Energy and Equity Director with SACE, and we'll now review a few utilities. First is Duke Energy. Duke Energy operates Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas in North and South Carolina, and Duke Energy Florida operates in Florida. So you can see the three different breakouts there on the chart. Duke Energy is second to Florida Power and Light for installed solar capacity in the Southeast at just over 8,200 megawatts. I'll just go over a few new developments. In North and South Carolina, Duke Energy utilities have filed with state regulators to merge. This merger in the Carolinas will help align the programs while Florida will remain a separate entity. As far as its effect on solar, that should be minimal or on near-term solar additions, but could potentially reduce solar curtailment across the two systems. Second, in new developments in 2021, the passage of a bill at the legislature created a requirement for Duke's operating utilities to file a carbon plan that would reduce carbon dioxide emissions from electricity generation by 70% below 2005 levels by 2030 and to net zero by 2050. However, earlier this year, the legislature removed that 2030 emission reduction requirement. Also, in new developments, Duke Energy has filed a resource plan that shows a pullback on the amount of solar it plans to add to the grid. On October 1st, Duke filed its carbon plan, integrated resource plan, for its two utilities in North and South Carolina. Despite showing a lot of load growth, the plan includes a near-term action plan that recommends the utilities procure 4,000 megawatts of solar from 2025 to 2028. This is less than the plan the North Carolina Commission approved in 2024 to procure 6,460 megawatts of solar from 2023 to 2026. Although the most recent near-term action plan shows a decrease in solar, it shows an increase in most other resource types, with battery storage plans doubling to 5,600 megawatts, with most projected to come online by the end of 2034. And finally, in new developments, this year, Duke Energy proposed a community solar program, Clean Energy Connection, in North and South Carolina. This program was quickly approved in South Carolina, but was withdrawn in North Carolina. The program is modeled after Duke Energy Florida's community solar program, but unlike Florida, the program does not lead to the utility adding additional solar to its system. And then I wanted to give a little bit of information on distributed solar, which is mostly rooftop, and how that is gaining ground. Duke Energy Florida has seen a recent growth of rooftop solar in 2023 and 2024. And also in January 2024, the North Carolina Utilities Commission approved a new residential pilot program called Power Pair to incentivize solar customers to install companion battery storage and participate in a demand response program. Duke Energy is offering this pilot program in both of its utilities in North Carolina. Based on the carbon plan filed in October, it is not clear whether Duke plans to continue its residential Power Pair program after it reaches its cap, which will likely be in the next year or so. Duke has simultaneously proposed a non-residential version of Power Pair that is currently being considered by the North Carolina Commission. I'll now move on to Florida Power and Light. Florida Power and Light, or FPL, has the highest installed solar capacity in the Southeast at just over 8,300 megawatts. According to FPL's latest resource plan filed in April, the utility is planning to build almost 17,500 megawatts of solar capacity by 2035. This is a large goal, but FPL has demonstrated that it is capable of adding a lot of solar to the grid at a steady pace, with 2,250 megawatts coming online in 2024. FPL has established a process to source and build utility-scale solar at a fast pace. These solar additions are also timed with a delay in retirement of FPL's remaining coal asset, Plant Shearer Unit 3. Georgia Power is the primary owner of Plant Shearer and ultimately decides when the plant will retire. Plans for solar over the next few years are lower than previous years as the utility focuses on building out significant storage on its system. FPL's 400 megawatt Manatee battery storage project is currently the biggest operating in the region. Additionally, FPL's existing and planned solar and storage will allow the utility to reduce its reliance on gas. In its latest 10-year site plan, FPL's generation from gas is expected to drop from approximately 70% in 2024 to 60% in 2029. That will then reduce the fuel cost that is passed on directly to customers. This reduced fuel cost is a step towards affordability. And now I'll pass it back to Heather.
Okay, thanks, Stacy. So we're going to move from talking about Florida Power and Light to TVA, and I'm going to kind of like highlight the graph axes over here to the left. As Stacy mentioned, like FPL is, going to get to almost like 18,000 megawatts of solar capacity. But if you flip over to TVA, we're seeing kind of like a much lower ceiling, if that makes sense. And I'm kind of, again, reminding people that these utilities are a fairly similar size. We do see that TVA is showing some overdue progress on solar, particularly in 2025 and 2026. It does get to be a little bit, I think, more, it's not clear if some of the projects in 2028 and 2029 are going to end up coming to fruition. And one of the reasons for that, at least in part, is because of the current kind of like state of TVA and its resource planning. So, although TVA issued its draft IRP in September 2024, there has been some you know, leadership changes at the Tennessee Valley Authority Board of Directors. So, unlike some of the other utilities that we talked about, um, the most of the other utilities that we're talking about are regulated by state regulatory bodies. The TVA is actually governed by its board of directors, which is, and the board of directors is appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. So in last year in 2024, the Biden administration nominated one new member to the board, and two current directors who had been nominated by the Trump administration as first term. So currently the board lacks quorum. The hearing for some of the new nominees from the Trump administration was, I believe, last week. I'm not sure when the confirmation vote is, but due to all of that, as I stated, the board lacks quorum, and some of the day-to-day operations are delegated to the TVA CEO, and that includes continuing work on major construction projects that the board already approved. But that draft integrated resource plan that was filed in 2024, it did project more solar for the utility than the 2019 IRP. We do also have some other information that, some of the planned projects that uh, are being reported to EIA, like have already completed construction and somewhat. So we do have some confidence that, the incremental solar that we're seeing in 2025 and 2026 is tangible progress that's being made by the utility, but it is a little bit uncertain moving forward. Once a new board is confirmed, it's not clear whether TVA is going to move forward with finalizing that an IRP that aligns with that draft that was filed last year, or if it's just going to begin a new long-term planning process and kind of start over. Okay. So we're going to move on to Southern Company now. So this is another one of those utility systems that's comprised of multiple utilities. So Southern Company has three operating companies in the Southeast, in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. So Georgia Power is the largest of the three operating companies. It recently completed an IRP and has subsequently filed for certification from the Georgia Commission for over 10,000 megawatts of new generating capacity and contracts with existing capacity as part of the recent all-source procurement request for proposals. So a lot of the solar that we're seeing, a lot of the resources, as a matter of fact, that we're seeing from Georgia Power are coming from like a combination of there was a in full IRP process that occurred in 2022 that subsequently in 2023 the company filed an out of cycle update. So that 2023 update IRP, there were a couple of competitive procurements in 2023 and 2024. Then most recently in 2025, we had an IRP, and as part of the settlement for that IRP, they did approve that the company would be able to in the all source certification docket that they'd be able to seek up to, I think it was 8,500 megawatts of new capacity. And when we actually saw that filing, they included even a little bit more in a supplement. So I think one of the takeaways is also that Georgia Power in particular is growing a lot due to some of the forecasted load growth, due in part to data centers and other large load customers. So in the results of the IRP and the RFP, one other thing that we're seeing is that Georgia Power is, at the same time it's building out some solar, a lot of gas, but in that rush to meet the expanding load growth from large loads, one of the other resources that the utility is able to get online relatively quickly includes adding storage. So some of the solar that already exists is getting storage added to it. And although battery storage is generally going to charge from a mix of grid resources, it does pave the way for any utility, to integrate an increasing amount of solar. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about Alabama Power and Mississippi Power here, although you can see that it's not, it's not shining quite as bright as sister operating company. Alabama Power, though, it has taken some steps to build more solar by getting approval from its regulators through a certificate process, although there have been some setbacks in recent projects. The commission had just initially approved about 400 megawatts of renewable energy capacity in that certification, which Alabama Power is roughly on track to build despite those setbacks. For example, there have been several 80 megawatt projects that have been reflected in past reports that have been terminated, namely HEP Greenville in early 2024 and Notch 4 and 5 in just July of this year. This is a little bit underwhelming to see, given that one of the other steps that Alabama Power took when it got that initial 400 megawatts approved, it extended the deadline. It even expanded that certificate to authorize up to 2,400 megawatts of renewable. But as of yet, we haven't seen any signs of progress, and it's really unclear how much of that upper limit that was approved, the utility actually plans to pursue. Then finally, Mississippi Power is the smallest of Southern's operating companies in the region. It generally hasn't required much in the way of capacity additions. So its latest IRP stated that they're not anticipating new capacity needs until 2041. So that is why you don't see a lot of incremental solar beyond 2024. Okay. And I think that is about it for me on Southern Company. I'm going to hand it back to my colleague Stacy to talk a little bit about two of our utilities in South Carolina.
Thank you, Heather. We'll wrap up with Dominion and Santee Cooper. Dominion Energy South Carolina's 2024 solar capacity is just over 1,200 megawatts. The utility submitted an IRP update in 2025. This update showed a 1,125 megawatt reduction in planned solar between the 2023 reference build plan and the 2025 reference build plan. Storage is also reduced by 1,800 megawatts. However, 800 megawatts of hybrid solar and storage is included in the 2025 reference build plan. So we are looking forward to their next IRP in 2026, where we'll get more details and an update. Moving on to Santee Cooper's 2024 solar capacity is 333 megawatts. In September, Santee Cooper filed its 2025 IRP update. The 2025 update adjusts base planning assumptions from the 2023 IRP and the 2024 IRP update, while also providing status updates on items from the short-term action plans. Santee Cooper notes that the differences between the 2023 preferred portfolio and the 2025 portfolio update are primarily driven by higher load projections and a significant increase in solar costs due to the accelerated termination of federal tax credits. Although the update states that it plans to build 2,000 megawatts of solar by 2052, there appears to be very little in the way of incremental solar in the time frame of this report, which is through 2030. This is in direct contrast to the plan released in 2024 that included 1,800 megawatts of solar through 2031. Meanwhile, Santee Cooper is slowing the pace of solar additions compared to its historical pace. And Heather mentioned that on the previous slide. Additionally, in Dominion and Santee Cooper news, instead of opting to build solar and battery storage, which is least cost, these utilities have partnered to build a gas plant in Kennedy, South Carolina. Dominion coal retirements are being extended with the possibility of hybrid solar and storage to help make up for this lost capacity as well. Instead of relying on solar and battery storage, which is least cost, plans for solar have been reduced. And now I'll turn it back over to Heather.
Yeah, so I think for this slide, we kind of just wanted to end on doing a little bit of an overview on some of the like macro level topics that, influence, I think the amount of solar, both in the resource plans and also kind of like coming that are influencing forecasts in the future. I'll also invite Stacy and Maggie to kind of like chime in here as I'm overviewing some of these topics, which we talked a little bit at the beginning about affordability and load growth. So some of the fuel and storm recovery costs that are making up the electricity prices are really driving the costs for electric bills higher. And so, we see solar as helping to mitigate these. As we have mentioned a couple of times in the presentation, solar and particularly solar when paired with storage is low cost, it's low risk, and we really see that as a way to meet the rising demand for power from data centers. Storage in particular, I'm going to move down over to the lower left kind of box. So storage is specifically battery energy storage systems. When batteries are co-located with solar to make the project, the capacity that we've been talking about in the report, to make that capacity and the generation from it dispatchable, when paired with batteries. Battery can also be standalone to support the addition of solar elsewhere to the grid. And so we have seen southeastern utilities generally increase plans for battery storage. I talked earlier about how Georgia Power was one of those, FPL was one of those. We even see, I think we talk about this on the North Carolina page. It's of course much smaller in scale, but even some of the North Carolina electric member cooperatives are doing battery energy storage plus solar. So we're seeing, utilities of all types start to adopt this in their resource plans and in their capacity additions. I think transmission planning and federal, I don't know if Maggie or Stacy kind of like want to chime in on these as we're finished.
Sure, I'll talk a bit about transmission planning anytime. Yes, transmission, the grid, the actual wires that move the electrons around. Transmission has become a roadblock to solar in many places. It's quite significant. In other places, it's just a matter of time, it seems. So there are a few measures from both the state level and the federal level that are trying to switch us from a reactive transmission planning process that we've had for years to more proactive to save customers money because it's really expensive to do things in a very reactive way, and also to speed up interconnection processes. Historically, that's been around generation interconnection, including solar and storage, but also other generation projects. And now we're seeing interconnection queues on the load side as well. So transmission planning is key for all of that. Stacy, do you want to talk? I can't remember
Yes,
what.
I can talk about the federal. As we are aware with the OBBB, a lot of the solar tax credits, well, these solar tax credits were eliminated. So by the end of the year, those for residential, commercial will be going away. So we'll see a decrease in solar, especially in distributed, and then it'll continue in the near term. And then in the medium term, we'll see more decrease in solar tax credits and those projects for the larger utility scale. And battery and storage projects will still have their tax credits. And then we also have seen a pullback on funding in solar programs. Solar for All was a big one that was cut in August. And there's a little more information on that in the report and where some of those stand. A lot of the people that had Solar for All are contesting those programs and hope or contending, I think is what's called, those programs. So hopefully we will have some more money coming in the future. But at the moment, those programs are terminated.
Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Heather. I'm going to turn to our Q&A section. And right on cue is the mailman, so my dogs might start barking. Here we go. First off, I think both Heather and Stacy and maybe others on our team will have something to say about this. It's clear that investor-owned utilities in the region are leaning toward natural gas in most scenarios to meet the load growth demand for data centers. I think being the utilities, cite reliability is the reason. However, it also allows them to make way more money in profits. What is needed to move the needle toward having more solar and storage? Is it up to the states or PSCs to create policies to encourage that type of development? So how do we get more solar and storage to meet that load growth? Heather or Stacy, you want to kick us off?
I can start. I think it is, there's no silver bullet for sure. Like it's kind of going to be like a patchwork of different policies and regulatory actions. One thing I will highlight here is that we talked a little bit earlier about fuel costs and kind of like especially with natural gas, like the cost for running that natural gas plant is actually passed on directly to customers in their bills, and the utilities generally do not have to, really consider whether or not the price to like run the natural gas plants are going to increase that much in the future because they're not going to be paying for the fuel. So I'd say that one way to kind of move the needle towards solar and storage would be for utilities to like maybe have to pay more of a share of the fuel costs rather than passing 100% of those onto the customer.
And I'll add on to that. We know that solar and storage are least cost to build, and they're quick to build. So we are definitely encouraging that. And there's definitely discussions about that in the states throughout the region. This can be solved in many ways, as Heather mentioned. There's discussion at legislatures, there's discussion in rate cases, there's discussions at commissions. There was a large load discussion earlier this month in North Carolina. So there's just a lot of talk about it. It's what makes it the most sense in the different states and with the different utilities. And we're encouraging and being part of those discussions.
Thanks. Steve, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think those are good answers. I still think there's an institutional bias in a lot of the utilities against solar. And that's why, we continue to sort of highlight the Florida example of where it's being built out to scale and at pace that, is still not fast enough for us I think we'd like to see even FP&L accelerating their deployment. But when the utilities have a bias towards burning stuff, I think that it really is something that has to be directly countered. And we've seen some utility leaders continuing to sort of play this card of where solar is intermittent and as if they've never heard of storage and as if they're not, keeping up with current technology deployment. And so this kind of misinformation, we would ask that folks in the media and other folks really call that out because it's just not accurate and it leads to a degeneration of the overall policy debate when they're able to say, well, solar's intermittent, and they act as if solar and storage isn't being coupled to overcome that. And I think that's an important institutional bias that we need to counter.
I did think of one more thing that I want to say here is that, this is the solar report. So we do focus on, look at how much solar they're deploying. So I think one of the things with this question is also, yes, these utilities are deploying a lot of, solar, but they are also deploying a lot of everything there, and that includes these fossil gas plants. So there is a section in the report where we kind of like do an overview of some of the resource plans and what percentage of those capacity additions are coming from solar. So you can kind of see a breakdown there. And, we are seeing that a lot of the Florida utilities, like they're also still experiencing load growth. It's not quite on the level that we're seeing in like Georgia, for instance, but we do see those utilities deploying or like like all of the capacity additions that they need. More a bigger percent of those are being met through solar. So I think that's it for that question.
Thanks, Heather, Stacy, and Steve. All right, yes. Um, one of the questions is noting that there are pretty big differences between the states. And so, Stacy, can you talk to sort of what we think are at least some of the potential drivers for the differences between the states? Is it mostly regulatory? Is it compliance? Is it permitting issues? Is it something else?
I'd say it's a little bit of all of that. In different states, there are different regulatory allowances. South Carolina just had a big energy bill that did open up some opportunity in South Carolina that hopefully will get some more solar on the books there. North Carolina has a goal or had a goal for 30% by or 70% by 2030 and zero by 2050. So that is something that helped move things along. In North Carolina, Florida, they have a very motivated utility that has a goal that they are pushing towards there for Florida Power and Light. So that's helping increase the amount of solar in Florida. TVA has its challenges. It's like Heather mentioned earlier, they are slow to get out the gate, so it's hard to catch up there. But we are seeing some increases in gains in the future in that territory. So it's just different all around the Southeast.
Great. Thank you, Stacy. Heather, I think this is related to you did the comparison between TVA and FPL. So there's a question about, a similar comparison between Southern Company and FPL. How do they compare on, the size or number of customers and the solar capacity?
Yeah. So in terms of comparisons between Southern Company and FPL, FPL is a little bit larger, but because Southern is composed of these, a couple of different utilities. Georgia Power makes up the majority of the solar capacity, but if you're looking at something like retail sales, which is kind of like a proxy for like how much load that they have, we see that Georgia Power and Alabama Power are, relatively large. But I think that the takeaways for like how would you want to compare Southern and FPL? I think some of the takeaways are that, if you want to compare a utility also to itself over time. So when we talked a little bit earlier about the pace of capacity deployments, I think that the takeaway was that FPL has high and sustained capacity deployments over time. Southern is a little bit shakier. We see some years not a lot of solar being added. Some of the solar that is planned to be added is a lot further off in the future. So, that's kind of why we had Southern on that utilities to watch list instead of, kind of like a clear answer of like being a leader or not is because some of those capacity additions are further off in the future.
Maggie, can I add to that? I think we just need to name something very clearly here. Um, and I noticed there's also a question about somebody critical of how sort of favorably we're speaking about FP&L, but let's just be really clear. Florida Power and Light has laid down the most ambitious solar deployment program of any utility in the Southeast by far, and is probably one of the most ambitious programs of any utility program across the United States. They originally called this Real Zero. They said they're going, for 93, thousand megawatts or 93 gigawatts of solar by 2045, 50, thousand megawatts of storage. And quite honestly, they're actually on that pace. They're holding up to it. We have not seen anything from the other utilities that is comparable to that. And so we applaud that level of ambition because one, it's tied to the seriousness of the crisis we're up against with climate change and climate disruption. It is also a utility that is not only just talking a good game. We've heard lots of Southeast utilities pontificate about, net zero and this and that, and we're going to do this and that. But the reality is, when somebody is actually deploying and actually putting the stuff on the ground in real time, at pace and at scale, it needs to be recognized and it needs to be called out. And we need to hold other utilities accountable because this utility is actually moving away from fossil gas. They're still highly dependent on it, but you're actually seeing the reductions, you're seeing the deployment. And so I think a lot of this is, if the utility leaderships adopts and embraces the technology, they can move mountains with the regulatory uh, entities and others like that, and state and the politics of it all. And what we don't have is, in Georgia and in the Carolinas and definitely at TVA, a real commitment to this technology. So I think when we're talking about the solar report, having a utility that actually believes in solar and is deploying to scale makes a huge difference. And it can get through the regulatory barriers, it can get through the politics, because they're committed to the technology, because they know it works, they know it's cost effective, they know it's low risk, and they have experience with it. Whereas these other utilities are still, quite honestly, in my opinion, dabbling with it, and they're a little uncertain about it. So it makes a huge difference when you have leadership that's willing to actually, you know, stand behind what they believe in and deploy the technology. And we're gonna see over time, as FP&L and other utilities continue to move forward in this direction, whether this is the right bet. But I'm very confident that they're making the decision as they're combining solar and storage as being a workhorse technology.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I was actually going to go to that question next, so we can that is a great sort of segue. I think also, a lot of the critiques that we do hear about FPL and solar is about rooftop solar, which is uh, you know, a different beast than utility scale solar. And what we're talking about as far as ambition here with FPL is their utility scale solar. I think it's important to note that we don't have good net metering in the Southeast. There aren't any Southeast utilities, certainly not the major ones that have in any way embraced either distributed rooftop solar or community solar. So FPL isn't an outlier on that. I think the utility business model in our region is set up that utilities are inherently against rooftop solar and customer-based solar, not because they don't like it, but just because it's not in their financial interest to encourage it. And so they are setting up as many roadblocks as they can. And that looks a little different in different states, but it's certainly something that's happening and something that SACE works on. We're not only looking at utility scale solar, we're advocating for solar at all different levels.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you know our history, we've challenged the utilities when they've tried to, step on. We believe that all market segments of solar need to be functioning and moving forward. But we also need to recognize that these gigawatt deployments is what is really moving the needle on carbon. And look, I've got rooftop solar. I believe in it. I am a firm believer. We think community solar, we want to see all of them functioning. But we also want to see the utilities, deploying to scale because that's what really is going to make a difference in the climate crisis.
Absolutely. And if we can fit in one last question, I know we're over time, but this really feeds in with the discussion. We had a question about how North and South Carolina distributed solar compares to utility solar, which I think is, if you check out the report, you'll see some charts and even go to the appendix. We have a whole table that will give you the numbers. But Stacy, do you want to talk a little bit about just the differences in the Carolinas in particular? Is it more distributed? Is it more utility scale? And how has that changed over time?
Definitely looking at capacity, there's more utility scale, as Steve mentioned, there's just more megawatts to put out there. But also early on, there was net metering in South Carolina. We had one-to-one net metering available, and that accelerated distributed rooftop solar in the state until if they reached their target. And then both North and South Carolina developed different models for what you can get back for what you put on the grid for your rooftop solar, which was at avoided cost, but didn't give you that one-to-one. So instead of getting maybe 13 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour you put on the grid, you may get 3 or 4 cents. So that just did not make it, the return on investment for those projects really increased, and the motivation to do those projects has decreased over time.
Thanks. All right. And we did have some additional questions we weren't able to get to. Hopefully, you'll take a look at the report and see if some of those are answered in there, or reach out to us after the webinar for additional questions. Thank you so much for joining.